care of it.
Friendly, let me know, happy to help.
But I think it's actually, I noticed last night when they, I was in my yard, and the wind must have knocked one down, if it didn't fall out of the tree.
Sure.
And they were
hatching.
little, yeah. So I
Okay.
burned those.
Just, yep.
But my neighbors, it's not gonna be good, but I noticed when I'm driving around, I noticed.
Can see it.
Figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. It just, there's a McAfee scanning thing up there, and it disappeared when I clicked that on. Call the Tremont Planning Board meeting of April 26th to order at 6:03. Roll call, we have Lawson Wilson, Brett Witham, Beth Gott, Jeff Young, myself, Mark Good, CEO John Larson, and representatives of the applicant and some of the abutters and other members of the public. Don't need to excuse any absences. Before we get into anything, Jeff, you did see the opinion from Collier?
Yes, this time it was provided to me before the meeting, not at the meeting.
What's that?
Yes, this time it was provided to me before the meeting
Okay,
and not
yeah.
at the meeting.
Well, okay, and so are you gonna recuse yourself, or do we need to take a vote? You can voluntarily do it, or we can vote.
That's very nice of you to offer. I'm not going to recuse myself, and I'd like to make a statement.
Okay?
I want to say that I do not know the applicant. I've never met her that I can recall. And my only knowledge about the applicant is from this application and previous applications to the board. So, as far as my knowledge of the applicant, I have no bias. In 1956, I was 5 years old, and my family started a family camping in the Adirondacks. We camped there every year, right through college. After college, my boys who were old enough, I took them up to the Adirondacks camping until we moved here to Tremont 17 years ago. So I don't have any bias or impartiality, whatever, about camping or the activity of camping. I support it long before COVID made camping the most popular activity going. I believe the board and the public needs my reasons as to why I signed the petition. I signed a petition because this board is not an elected board, it's an appointed board. There's no recourse to the residents of Tremont to take us off this board by voting. They don't have recourse. We're appointed here. The only recourse is through petitioning the selectmen and asking for hearings and so forth on decisions we made or they may not agree with. And I believe the public has that right, and I would support it. I'd sign that petition again if it was put before me. I think under your leadership, Mark, that the many people in town don't feel they've been heard, and this is just putting it before the public, another alternative to what this board decided is correct for this community. It's just a matter of choice. I mean, I understand you even spoke against it at the selectmen meeting. I don't think we should speak against the public speaking out and putting petitions forward, and I think we all can participate in that process. The law. Yes, we have an opinion from the Maine Municipal Association, and it states that we've read it, and there's a case that he quotes, Pelkey versus City of Presque Isle. On that particular case, if you read it, and unfortunately I put my lawyer hat back on for a moment and actually pulled the case up and read it, and it involves a member of the board who voted against a petition, but before he became a member of the planning board, he was a vocal opponent to the application at public meetings and so forth. And then he became a member of the board and acted. Yes, I believe there's a bias there. And I agree with the holding of the case, but it doesn't apply here. The very next case, or two cases afterwards, which was not cited by either Maine Municipal Association attorney or our own attorney, is Wide Waters Stillhammer, and the court found no bias on a board member who signed a letter written in support of a zoning change in that town that would have impact on the matter that was currently being reviewed by the board. The court did not find a bias there. That's far more applicable than the case that's cited by the Maine Municipal Association attorney. I will state that I have no bias. I can be impartial. I know no reason I can't be impartial, and I will not recuse myself from this application.
Do I have a motion?
Well, let me just respond a little bit, if I could.
Sure.
Just to a couple things.
Better
So,
have a motion, but go ahead.
yeah, you know, Jeff, you're right. We are not elected. We were appointed. And I think but based on that point, there's I think, an incorrect assumption that somehow we up here are setting policy and making the sorts of judgments that an elected official would. We're not. We have a set of ordinances that we have to follow. We're not advocates. We're not, we're not making policy decisions. And the public doesn't advocate for us to make policy choices. We don't do that. We have the ordinance and we follow it, and that's it. And I think you do need to, it's okay to have different viewpoints. In fact, I think that's healthy. I think that's what we want. I think that I would hope and expect that the Board of Selectmen, in appointing us, decided to have a collection of people with different views. Perfectly fine. But I do think you need to try to stay out of the, at least maintain the appearance of just being a straight shooter and just looking at the ordinance and applying the ordinance to the facts. As I was thinking about this, the one thing that always stuck in my mind is the one thing that concerned me, and it goes back to last year. I remember in a meeting that sua sponte, in the miscellaneous portion of the meeting, the miscellaneous portion of the agenda, you moved to have a moratorium on campgrounds. And I thought it was odd, and it was after all the people that were interested in campgrounds had left. It wasn't on the agenda. And I thought it was odd that we did it that way. At the time, I voted for it, and after I thought about it that night, I said, that was wrong. It was wrong, and I don't know why a board member would move sua sponte in the miscellaneous portion of the agenda for a moratorium on campgrounds. The board, the selectmen, ultimately decided not to adopt that. And it always stuck in my mind, like, why would you do that? I don't get it, but it's fine. And then I also felt, when we were negotiating internally the changes to the campground ordinances that we're going to submit, there was a lot of feedback, there was a lot of discussion, and a lot of it, frankly, was with you, which is great, to have that negotiation. But I was like, geez, after I learned that a petition was signed that would basically, make all that irrelevant, it was a little, I was like, geez, why am I doing this? What's the point? What's the point in negotiating this with board members if they're going to, and vote for it, if they're going to go out and essentially sign a petition that votes against it, that would make the whole process irrelevant. So I'll just stop there, and that's all I wanted to say. But I absolutely appreciate that you probably don't have a personal bias against the applicant. That's not what we're here about. It's really a bias against a particular type of projects, despite what's permitted in the ordinance. And so anyway, those are my thoughts.
You want to make a motion?
Not really.
Do you want more discussion now, or do you want a motion before we?
I'd like a motion before, and I'll make it if nobody else does.
I don't think I'm ready to make a motion. Makes me feel like I should be clear about, but I'm not quite clear yet.
I'll make a motion that Jeff Young should recuse himself from discussions on Pointy Head based on the apparent bias, apparent bias as determined by the MMA attorney and by town attorney James Collier. Have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and second on the table. Okay, Flossie, you want
I think a quick question. What does sponte mean?
Of your own accord, just, just on your own.
Like
Out of
taking
the blue.
initiative as opposed to responding to something.
Well, right, I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't on the agenda.
Right.
Right.
So
It's during a
Introducing a
miscellaneous
new
part of the
idea.
meeting, it's just introducing a moratorium, which sort of on your own without any, I don't know if there were outside appeals to Jeff to do that.
Sure.
I don't know, but I think it should have
Okay.
been a part of the agenda, because it was odd to me that all the people that are interested in campgrounds left because that matter was over, and during the miscellaneous portion, we acted on something I think that rose to the level of importance that it should have been on the agenda.
Yeah.
That, and I just never, it always felt kind of weird to me.
And then Jeff, I just wanted to thank you for your remarks. It's sort of super helpful, and ask you to circle back a little bit. You started talking about another case that was different from the Pelkey versus the city of Presque Isle. And I guess, could you just say it again a little bit slower? I missed.
It's cited in the same paragraph in the main, if you have the manual with you, it's on page 22. And it's Widewater Stillwater Company LLC against the city of Bangor. And the court refused to find that a letter written in support of the zoning change constituted evidence of a board member's bias regarding an application which is currently being reviewed by the board.
Right.
I don't know, maybe we'll go home.
It's in the same paragraph as the prior case.
Pardon?
Is this open for public discussion also?
No,
Okay.
sorry.
No, just asking.
So take it through with me again. Why is that case more relevant than the Pelkey versus city of Presque Isle?
City of Presque Isle involved a resident of the city of Presque Isle who was an opponent to an application before the board. That was
And
being
before he
used-
became a member of the
Before he became a member. And during the process of that review, he then became a member of the board. And he voted against it as a member of the board.
Yep.
The court found, in that instance, he had a bias.
Right. And you have not expressed any opposition to this
No.
application.
No, as I say, I do it because I think residents have an ability, should have an ability, and the law provides it, to put matters before the general public to vote, and they did it through a petitioning process.
And you stated tonight that you don't have a bias on this application. or
No,
the applicant.
I have no bias in this application at all. I have no reason to have a bias.
Jeff, I'll ignore what I consider to be a personal attack on my leadership. But my concern, and it's not just my concern, otherwise I wouldn't have brought it up, is that this process, which could be tainted, and that if we don't reach a decision that one party or the other likes, that the first thing they're going to say is bias on the board. And I'm worried that you may say you don't have a bias against this particular project, but one of those petitions, at least that you signed, would affect this project if it went through. And we still don't know whether it's going to go before selectmen in a special town meeting or not.
Your point is?
Well,
My
it's
point
close.
is, I'm worried about you tainting the procedure with bias.
Yeah, I mean, if you're voting in favor, and it's not a regular, this isn't like I think it's different if it's a general vote. I think a petition is it's essentially a motion on behalf of an interested group, and you've signed on to that, and if that petition is successful, it will, what I'm hearing you say, it'll impact this application in a way that probably the applicant would not be in favor of. That feels a little, the case that I haven't read the case, but with a person came out against a matter and then joined the planning board, you can connect the dots as to where you've made an action against a current applicant while you're on the planning board, which it feels even worse. But I don't know, maybe. Yeah. Again, we're not here to be. We're not policymakers here. We follow the ordinance. It's the application's complete or not. I think there's some judgment on certain issues at the margins, but by and large, we're not policymakers. And if you're gonna get behind, I think you need to try to keep above that as best you can. It doesn't mean you can't vote, but I think when you're voting or advocating with an interest group that absolutely should have a voice and absolutely be listened to, and absolutely. But when you do that, when you're on and you're part of the board that makes those decisions, it's tough. I can see how that's caused an issue with the town attorney and other folks. So it's a close call for me, though. I'll say that because I do think it's important for there to be a broad range of views here. I wish you hadn't done it because I kind of want you here. Because I think what it opens up to now is there'll be certain, folks that feel like their voice has been removed, and we don't want that either. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one for me.
Right, it is a close one, and that's why we sought the legal opinions.
Brad, you make the point of policy and reviewing, following the ordinances. And maybe we're looking at the word policy differently. But I agree with you 100%. When an application before us, this binder is what we have to follow, and it's what we have to, and interpretations of it. I agree with you 100%. But when we sit here as a board and start rewriting ordinances as we just finished on campgrounds itself, in my mind, that goes to more of a policy issue because we're putting something forward to the public after we've reviewed it and gone through it. So I see a policy aspect function to this board. Maybe policy isn't the right word, but it's a different function than saying, applicant A, you have to do it 1, 2, and 3 to give us, before we approve or deny an application.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That came up, I think, kind of in an odd way. Generally speaking, the way those things hopefully would arise when you're redoing the ordinances is there's a comprehensive plan that you go through and that informs the ordinance. We kind of had to do that at least a couple times out of sequence. But yeah, I get it. Yeah, but that, yeah, it's a tough one.
Mark, your motion was that Jeff should recuse himself due to an apparent bias?
Which is, if you remember the MMA
right. Yeah, and I just
opinion.
I think it's useful to draw a distinction between like Jeff's bias and Jeff's apparent bias, and that there's actually like an important difference there, and that the motion isn't that Jeff is biased. The motion is that Jeff might appear to be biased.
And we should avoid any appearance.
Avoid the appearance of any bias. That compels me. That helps me make a decision.
Any more discussion? If not, I'm going to call for a vote. Hearing none, all in favor? And Jeff, you can't vote, so you're able to participate as a member of the public, Jeff.
Oh, I thank you for that opportunity. But I'm gonna go home, ask to be excused the rest of the meeting, go home at dinner.
Mr. Chair, I have another potential board conflict issue if I can raise it.
Okay.
Thank you. In doing our, Dan Pelleggi, I represent several of the abutters. In doing our due diligence before tonight's meeting about the Pointy Head Campground, I learned that Gott Brothers Leasing Inc. owns 4 parcels on Bass Harbor Woods Road adjacent to the applicant's property. Ms. Gott's husband, Tim, is one of the shareholders. I don't know to what extent the family or Ms. Gott derives any income from that, but it's just something I want to raise for the board and let the board explore. Thank you.
I'm aware of that, and that was the next thing I was gonna bring up. Now, I looked at the tax maps, and she's listed in here as an abutter within 500 feet. No, none of the parcels that are involved here actually abut the Pointy Head property. But Beth, I was gonna ask you about that as well.
Yeah, no, I don't, it's Tim, Tom, and Peter, it's theirs, I'm just a secretary, I just do the books, so I mean, it doesn't mean
And I'm
anything
vouch
to me.
for that,
Yeah,
because I am one of the owners.
yeah, so I have no say in anything that they do.
I don't take a position, I raise it so the board can discuss it, so as you know, it's a board issue, it's not mine.
Yeah.
You
Right,
don't need to
right.
explain to me.
Right.
Thank you for addressing it.
We're
Yeah.
bringing it up, yeah, it's next on the list.
Beth, do you derive income from those, from that?
Probably Timmy does, yeah, gets a third of it, yeah, but, I mean, pretty much all the property there is sold.
Another tough one.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand. So are they rental properties or something
No, they're lots to be sold.
to be sold? So,
It's a subdivision that Douglas,
right. And so the theory would be
And
that
then
if
they
the
were left with
campground were
3
there,
boys.
their lots would be more desirable?
Or that, I mean, does Beth have a financial interest in what happens on the neighbor's property? On Pointy Head, you know, on this parcel, as an abutter?
I don't, do we abut that lot?
You don't directly abut it, no,
Okay,
and none of those parcels,
okay.
from what I could see on the tax map, yeah.
Mark, I never could speak when I was in Beth's place, and we didn't abut.
You
We-
did.
No, Ken abuts, I don't abut.
I was just told that at the time, we thought you did abut. Because Kevin just told me like a week or so ago that he found out through Ken that they don't know, you guys don't abut.
And I never,
I thought we did at the time.
Yeah.
and so,
So at the time, we thought you abutted and now we don't, so okay, fine. But
Sorry, so Beth
that has nothing-
does abut or does not abut?
The properties do not touch Pointy Head property.
Is Beth an abutter?
No.
So are we gonna get into some analysis where if someone in proximity, it's proximate to a project and someone is connected?
That's
Well,
not
there's a-
word.
there's
It's
some-
a definition,
That's
right?
crazy.
It's not a,
Beth, do you think you have a conflict?
I have no conflict of
Okay,
interest here.
satisfies me.
I mean, I mean, it's, Gott Brothers Leasing, it's not me. Granted, yeah, Timmy might get a third of something, but it,
okay, so do you share a boundary with the property? Or are you across the street from the property? Or across the street?
Not,
I'm
without
looking at you,
the
Mark.
tax map, yeah, it's not across the street, there's properties between it.
So it doesn't share a boundary?
There's no part of these properties that are listed here, 003, 011-7, 6, 5, and 16, touches the Pointy Head property,
Great,
according to the tax maps.
okay. That satisfies me. Yeah. And there's no motion? Yeah,
Well, we should make a motion
sort of acknowledging
that,
that, talk about it?
say that she doesn't have a conflict, or she does, as an abutter, she could actually have a.
I'll make a motion that Beth Scott is not an abutter to this project. She is not property that has one or more common boundaries, or is across the street or a stream from the property involved in the application. And therefore does not have a conflict of interest.
Across the street.
Unless I'm misunderstanding what's going on in
Yeah,
the situation.
that's,
Maybe I'm wrong.
Want a copy of the tax map, Mark?
yeah, a bigger one than it's in here.
And Mark, where'd you find the list of the butters in the?
Page, this one's on page 2 of the Pointy Head application. Well, actually, there are a lot of page 2s.
I think I found it. That's true.
It's the ones on, first page, it's abutting property owners within 500 feet.
And Ken got.
Ken God is, you know, that, he's a direct abutter.
Sorry, where is the property that we're talking about? Goth Brothers Leasing Incorporated?
Yeah.
4 lots.
Map 3. That ruined my eyes trying to figure it out this afternoon. So if you want to gather around, I'll point them out.
Great.
Five, 6, 7, and 16.
Yeah, no. And we're talking about 10A, right?
Yeah.
Great. I'll leave my motion unamended.
We have a second.
Yeah, so I guess the question whether we need to do anything affirmatively, or we should probably just take no action.
I just
Sure.
think it's a little cleaner.
Okay, I'll second.
Motion and second on the table to, now I forgot your motion to find that,
Bev got does not have a conflict of interest because she's not in the butter.
because she's not a butter, okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Beth will have to recuse yourself on this, okay? Abstain,
Did you
I
approve
should
the
say.
minutes from last meeting?
What's that?
Did we approve the minutes from last meeting?
Not yet.
Not yet. I'll take care of all this first.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Minutes from the April 12th meeting. Anybody see any issues?
I did not.
No.
I didn't either.
Okay,
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from April 12th.
Second.
motion second on the table to approve the minutes of April 12th. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Unanimous? Okay. Well, folks, you probably know there's going to be no decision tonight. You know, we won't be formally considering this application tonight. It's basically the public hearing, and we have to determine whether the little change makes the application complete or not. But first, I see on the agenda, peer review stormwater management. John put that on there, and I don't know, what do you folks think about that? I don't want to get into a lot of detail about that. We know that Greg has submitted a peer review, that he found some little issues, but overall seems to have no problems with it. And I think John talked to Greg, right?
I did.
Yeah, and what did Greg's tell you?
Overall, the stormwater plan that was submitted was,
And we also have.
I'm sorry, wait, can you just finish your sentence?
I'm sorry.
the stormwater plan that, Edifine submitted was adequate.
Okay, and we also got a response at the, literally the last minute on Tuesday. Thank you, from Hedifine. And I'm going to guess that, Mr. Plague's gonna wanna respond to that at some point.
Is there something new, Mr. Chair, that arrived that is not part of the, what's the date of the packet? April 19th packet?
You've been CC'd on this, like, and also there was the peer review from Greg Johnston. I understand there was some issues that you didn't receive that.
I received it yesterday, I'm good. I have the April 13 Edifine report that I think you might be referring to, Matt.
April 13th, yes.
Yeah, I have that.
Okay. So you're all set. You're not gonna respond in writing to this. I just don't wanna go through all this tonight. You wanna respond during the public hearing?
I will address the issues that we have during the public hearing
Okay,
tonight.
great. Folks, you feel a need to discuss the Greg Johnston thing any further?
No, I
Review.
think it's fine. And I also looked at the response from Edifine, it's fine.
Fine, okay. So next up, we have to determine completeness
Sorry,
of the.
before you move on, so, we can still talk about stormwater when we get to the, substantive review.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes,
I just
yeah,
wanna make sure
that all
we're
will
not-
take place there, yeah. Don't worry, we're not gonna sweep that under the table, yeah, okay. And the findings of fact and everything. So now, determination of the complete application. Now, I don't know if anybody brought the plans. I have some here. Apparently, Alina, I'm gonna ask you, this is just one cabin has been moved, is that correct?
Yes, based on the site walkthrough, the location of two cabins, 14 and 15, is slightly shifted. to
Two
more-
cabins, not one.
Well, 14 and 15 was shifted slightly to better reflect where they're located on site.
To better what?
To better reflect where they're actually located on the site. So they're shifted farther
Okay.
from the property line.
And 13 stays where it is.
And do I remember correctly, Alina, that the one that was that was bound was revised?
Yes, I have.
Seeming to remember that.
Is this, I have C1 and C2 here.
Right, but are they dated?
Well,
October 29th. They're all.
this one is the 29th. And
Helpful or not, I do have a full-size set here.
this one, here, this one has notes, it's the revisions. Date 2/16 and 3/28 of this year.
Yes.
I see.
Okay.
Right.
Yep,
And,
yep.
right, the one.
Do you guys have copies of that? Okay, because I have the large version if anybody needs to look at it. So how far were they actually moved without me trying to find an architect's scale?
Approximately 25 feet farther away from the property line.
Farther from the property line. So John, should we make a motion to find it complete as amended?
That would be my suggestion.
Actually, he's going down there.
I understand that you determined the application complete
We did, yes,
before,
yes.
then you did the sidewalk. And there were some changes on the sidewalk.
The only change was the moving of these two cabins.
Alina, what does TBM for septic field mean?
It's a temporary benchmark, that's what TPM stands for. So, on the site walk, there's some stakes that
Right.
outline the septic field. One of those stakes was, mistakenly referred to by some as the corner of the septic field, but it's not. It's a reference point. The septic field is as shown on the plan.
Great, thank you. Seems okay to me.
Yeah, I don't see any issue. It's a small change.
Right. I'll make a motion to find the,
Did you see the it suggested motion?
Oh,
That's
thank you.
probably the best thing. In John's memo. But actually, just says 14 and 15 were both relocated, correct, Alina? So we should say that.
and I'll just point out that, there's actually three things. So 14 and 15 have been moved, and the temporary base mark has been identified for the septic field,
Okay.
which was not on the February 16th version. So I'll make a,
Yeah, we don't have to approve the stormwater management plan here because we've already approved it as complete. That'll be when we do the review of the whole project.
right. I mean, I don't feel like we need a motion to find the stormwater.
I agree with you
The peer
there.
review
I think
complete,
just, yeah, the cabin's being
Yep.
relocated.
Oh, I see, right, the second half of that.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. And, right, because I don't think I'm ready to approve the stormwater management. Like,
thank you.
we can move that a little closer before we do that. So, I'll make a motion that the revised sheet C1 dated with March 28th, 2022, is complete, and make note of the three changes, which is the inclusion of the temporary base mark for the septic field and the relocated cabins 14 and 15.
Second.
Motion and second on the table to find the revised C1 plan to be complete, showing cabin 14, 15 being relocated, and the benchmark for the septic field being noted on the plan. Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote. 4-0, okay. Okay, now what everybody's been waiting for. I'll call the public hearing on, for the Pointy Head Campground to order at 7:42 PM. Okay, folks, if you can, anybody who wants to make a comment, if you could state your name and your address, and please keep your comments as brief as possible. And raise your hand, I'll call you first. Jamie, is that you?
You said 7:42, I just wanted to correct you.
6:42, sorry. The big hands on the.
Yeah.
Oh, Dan.
I'll go first. I didn't
Yeah,
want to.
gee,
but I'll go
yeah,
first.
yeah. I thought everybody's gonna raise their hands.
Hi, you all know me, but it's nice to see you again. I'm Daniel Pelleggi. I represent several abutters, Ted Kleinman, Leslie Jones, Jim Kaufman, Laura Levin, and Deneen Robert Welsh. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I submitted a fairly lengthy memo with some exhibits, and I'm not going to talk about all of that tonight. I stand by everything that is submitted there. I think that they're all valid positions and valid reasons to deny this application. But I want to talk about some highlights about things that I think that the board ought to pay particular attention to. And just to start off, I think a little summary is in order. That through several iterations of this campground, we've gone through the process where the applicant has essentially poo-pooed the suggestions by the abutters of problems with the application. From we don't need a survey because the setbacks are fine, to we don't have an accurate topographical map, we don't have an accurate survey. And each of these issues, as we've gone through these iterations, it's been borne out that the abutters have been correct. Another issue that the abutters have been correct about is wetlands. This application came to this board and there wasn't a single wetland delineated. And if you look at the application and the revised plans that have been submitted to date, there's not a single wetland outline on the applicant's proposal. We raised it during completeness review. We were told that we were just wrong, that a surveyor had been out there and there weren't wetlands. So the abutters spent their money. They hired Haley Ward and Mr. Brochu, who's going to talk to you in a few minutes, who did a preliminary study and went on the sidewalk to confirm some of what his suspicions were. And I was there, you guys were there, as a swamp. Wetlands all over that property.
Swamp where?
So we,
Sir, let him speak, okay?
in anticipation of,
Motherfuckers.
in anticipation of an April 12th public hearing, submitted this memo and an outline prepared by Mr. Brochu of what he believed were wetlands areas. At the deadline, the filing deadline before today's hearing, the applicant submitted Mr. Moise's report. And to the extent that it addressed wetlands on part of the development property, it echoed what Mr. Brochu said. Now, a couple of issues. We did, Mr. Brochu will talk about this, but we did a little bit of an overlay of his findings and Mr. Moise's findings. I'll talk about connection and contiguous wetlands in just a second. But there are a lot of wetlands. They start within 250 feet of your harbor, and they continue eastward across the property. They go off-site, and they're not measured off-site. They go off-site to the north, and they're not measured off-site to the north. If you look at, anybody looks at Google Maps, you can see that there's a large heath to the north that's literally a swamp that appears to drain into this area. There's no measurements of the wetlands where they leave the property to the north or the south. They leave the south, by the way, in two directions. Because of time constraints, Mr. Moise indicated in his preliminary report, he only had a chance to evaluate approximately, I would say, a little more than half, 60% maybe of the site, and that he didn't look at the eastern part of the site. And his drawing doesn't address the eastern part of the site. The important thing is Mr. Moise opined that the two identified wetlands on his report, one to the west by the harbor side, and then he said that there's a ditch and then another larger wetland area, are not contiguous because they are connected by what he called a ditch. Now, there's no evidence in the application materials. I looked carefully before I came tonight at all of the plans that the applicant has submitted. There's no ditch reflected on any of those plans in the location that Mr. Moise identified in his recent report. There's not, the surveyor, Pliskin Day didn't identify a ditch. There's been no historical documentation presented that there was ever a man-made ditch that there's ever anything other than natural drainage swales. Mr. Moise's report also identified a couple of wetland areas between the east side and the west wetland. There are two other spots of wetlands between them. And I just want to read your definition from your land use ordinance, where it identifies, page 72 by the way, identifies freshwater wetlands and includes the language, freshwater wetlands may contain small stream channels or inclusions of land that do not conform to the criteria of this direct definition. Inclusions of land, small channels, do not disconnect wetlands sufficiently to make them not contiguous. In other words, if they're connected by those things, they're still contiguous. The reason I say that is because Tremont uses a definition of wetlands that identifies 10 contiguous acres. The report that we submitted from Haley Ward that Mr. Brochu can talk about demonstrates that there are more than 10 acres of contiguous wetlands here. So, that being said, by the way, I mean, I think that you can tell you walked that there's a hydrological connection between all of that stuff as well. Now, importantly, what's in the wetland? A parking lot, part of which is going to be added, expanded, filled. At least 5 cottage or tent sites, a dumpster pad that doesn't exist yet, but that's going to be filled and built, a road and path network, at least one vernal pool that may or may not, under state statutes, require a 250-foot setback. Regardless, a vernal pool, as the board knows from your ordinance and from your work, houses sensitive wildlife. It includes the toe of the septic field, again, more fill into a wetlands area. Some of the wetlands are located within 250 feet and 500 feet of the harbor. Site plan review ordinance, section 9A. The applicant can't demonstrate that the site's natural capabilities to support development preserve environmentally sensitive areas to the maximum extent. Respectfully, this application, it's a campground, it's not a factory, but to the extent a campground can, to the maximum extent, develop the wetlands, I'd suggest that they've done that, at least on the eastern side of the property. A large amount of this campground infrastructure exists within wetland areas. The application doesn't identify or make a condition or ask the board to make a condition of approval that state permitting, Natural Resources Protection Act permitting be obtained as a condition of any approval. I'd suggest you can't approve it based on your ordinance, but if you did, this is a site that's going to require not only stormwater approval, but resource protection approval. Under that act, freshwater wetlands are protected natural resources if they're more than 20,000 square feet or roughly a little less than half an acre. You've got that here in spades over and over. I point that out only to indicate when you look back and you listen to the applicant and you look at the report that Mr. Moise has submitted to date, it's incomplete by his own standards, by his own statements. It's incomplete. He didn't have time to formalize it, to do the detail. He didn't have time to do the east side of the property. He focused on the area of the maximum development. He did not measure, even to a tiny extent, off-site connected wetlands to the northeast and to the south and southeast. We know they're there. He shows them they're there. Haley Ward shows that they're there, and asked the board to take the stormwater, the wetlands issue seriously. With respect to stormwater, site plan review ordinance 9H1 requires the stormwater be retained on site. This doesn't do that. Admittedly, it's the change according to the Hedifine study is not a lot, but there is an increase in flow off site. Section H2 requires that that the applicant not allow an increase of flow rate off-site, it does. And Section H4 says that all natural drainage ways must not be filled. We've already talked about the fill that's being placed in several wetlands areas. Those are all reasons that the board has to deny the application. You're gonna hear a lot from the folks that live next to this property, especially to the south, about buffering and screening. It is inexplicable to me that in open areas on the development site, the developer intends to put raised platforms that are 6 to 8 feet above the surface of the earth, on top of which tents are going to be erected. There's no elevations that show these things can have railings or anything that might make campers safe. But setting that aside, what it does is essentially puts the light and the noise and the visual sight lines higher than the intended screening at 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 4 years and beyond. I've submitted some photos to make some of that clear. There's some other areas that are sort of in the woods back of the site that are screened effectively year round. But the sites that are to the west, the road side of this development are wide open, and they are completely, even with the evergreen trees that are proposed, they are not year-round screened from the neighbors. They're not year-round, they're not protected, they're not protecting the neighbors from noise, they're not protecting the neighbors from light. The use of the road, there's no screening on the road, there's no screening from the public road back onto the campground, there's no screening on the parking lot, headlights from campers coming and going at all hours. It is an inadequate application. It doesn't meet the requirements of either your land use ordinance or your site plan review ordinance. Land use ordinance, section 6A, 3 and 5 require a year-round visual screen that protects from light, noise, smells, dust, and preserves privacy. Respectfully, they can't do that, and they didn't do that with this application. Section 6TD, none of the screening standards that are in that section are addressed at all in the application, which require complete visual screens of all activity on the lot. I addressed in my written materials protected parcels, the shoreland area, either the marine fisheries part of the property, or more importantly, the resource protection part of the property across the street. There is no protection of those parcels from campers. There's no fencing, no gating, no warning, no signs, no on-site monitoring, nothing to protect those parcels. We know they've been used in the past. We know they've been used in the past for campers. We know that the sensitive shoreline is going to be used or can be used for launching kayaks, for people going down and playing around in the flats, accessing the water. None of that's allowed. None of that's okay. And site plan review section 9Q prohibits it. And because they didn't meet that standard, you can't grant the application. Remember, the applicant has the burden of proof on all areas of both of these ordinances that apply. We don't have a burden of proof. I think we've met it. I just want to take a minute to let Mr. Brochu either answer questions or address the hydrology and the wetlands surrounding this area and on site. Thank you for listening to me.
Mr. Brochu?
I think Dan did a pretty good summary of the wetlands on site as we found. I think basically and I have seen Dave Moise's mapping and pretty much agree with 100% of what he's shown. But I think the point is there's additional wetlands in the back that he admitted in his report that he didn't have time to finish, which I think are also connected to this wetland in the front. We have not been able, to do any on-site on this property investigation ourselves, only through the site walk, and we did look at some of the abutting properties off-site of this to check this out. We looked at light out topography, again, walked through the area, soils maps, and we think that there's quite a large finger of wetlands, which extends from that large heath in the back up into this site, which would connect everything. And I think that that's the big point, is with the definition of wetlands in the town of 10 contiguous acres, I think that we will find that all of this is contiguous and that it is over 10 acres and thus would be regulated by the town. And if you have any other questions for me specifically, I could try to answer them.
I don't at this time, but maybe another member does.
I guess like during a public hearing, I would be more interested
Yeah,
in hearing
yeah.
the public.
Yeah, that's the way I feel too. Peter God.
I get a question. They're saying that within 250 feet of the harbor, I mean, I've driven by there, I use to plow it and everything down there. But where is the wetlands? Is that just a wet spot that's running from the Haith down through? But where is the wetlands between, I mean, I'm sure the Pointy Head house is further than 250 feet from the harbor. You know, I've never noticed any so-called wetland down there. I'm just curious where it is that it's within 250 feet of the harbor, where this wetland is located. Is it in front of the house?
One of you want to respond to that?
Both Mr. Moyes and Haley Ward have identified an area. I'm just,
Yeah, without the maps, yeah.
it's hard to do without a map, sir, but from the, behind the house, sort of along the northern boundary of the property, headed off onto the Kleinman property, and down there's a stream that goes under the road. All of that's been identified as wetlands.
So it's something that's not actually above ground.
No, it's on the surface of the ground.
Ken?
Yeah.
Yeah, please identify yourself
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and
Ken Gott.
tell us where you live, even
Yes.
though we know where you live.
Ken Gott, 164 Harbor Drive. I'm right next to the first lot, the Pointy Head. Thank you for letting me speak. While this project is impactful of all the abutters, in my case, my adjoining border to the project will receive all the traffic activity relative to all operations of the campground. Basically, it extends from 102A all the way up to the campground parking lot. My primary concern is the lack of consideration on the plan for buffering along my property from the Pointy Head driveway. The driveway is only 8 feet from my property line. Please note that the existing small bushes I planted along don't provide sufficient barrier, to address my concern at all. They're just very small burning bushes. Unfortunately, Madeline Brogdon's staff already cut back a lot of these bushes without my consent, which depleted what there was. I do understand that the buffering performance standard for land use ordinances is to screen buildings or activities, land uses that could create nuisances, divert, block, or soften light, reduce noise, preserve privacy, reduce smells and dust. The close proximity of this driveway will cause me noise, privacy disruption, as well as unwanted headlights shining into my house, the apartment, on my deck, and the greater frequency that would occur, that, if it was a private residency, it wouldn't be a problem. When I first bought the property, it was just Pointy Head, a small B&B, there was no problem at all. But the amount of traffic coming through here, which I'll get to in a minute here, my second concern was the traffic issues about the existing narrow driveway, not a roadway, a driveway. The head of traffic generation reports, project reports 131 trips per day or 12 per hour. I feel that's a lot of traffic for a private, narrow, one-lane driveway. The driveway is only about 10 feet wide, and it appears that you'd never be able to have two cars pass if they met head-on coming in the driveway. It's also a concern that traffic entering and exiting the driveway into 102A. You know, if one car's coming in, and another one's coming out, you could have a traffic situation of cars coming in and out of the driveway, trying to leave and try to enter at the same time. But, the buffering is a huge issue for me. I think it would create quite a disruption to me and my family. Lastly, you know, I'll mention, you know, address the community engagement to buy into this project. Well, campgrounds within Tremont have become a hot commodity here. I would like to, you know, compare the Acadia Wilderness Campground. At least those owners did engage their neighbors in an attempt to buy into the project. Madeline didn't do anything to outreach to us, which demonstrates she'll do whatever she wants at the cost of good neighborhood relationships and a quiet-side community. So, but again, the no buffering on my property is a big concern to me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jim?
Thanks, Mark. My name's Jim Kaufman. I live at 36 Bass Harbor Woods Road with floor 11. Our property abuts the south edge of the proposed campground. So I expressed my opposition to the previous application and public hearing in 2020. And the application has been revised, but it doesn't really allay any of our concerns, so I'll just go over those here. First, I just want to say I don't know the applicant. I've never met her. She's never reached out to us as neighbors, and as far as I can tell, she doesn't reside at the Pointy Head property and is seldom on site. As I said before, based on our experience with the unpermitted campsites on our property and the activities of the guests who stayed in them in 2019, we have no reason to believe that she's given any thought to how it might negatively impact her neighbors. So we have a number of concerns, and some are going to be discussed by our neighbors, but I'll focus my comments on the potential impacts relevant to our quality of life and the value of our property and safety. Most of which relate to the buffering requirements and land use ordinance and failure of the proposal to meet those requirements. So I'm concerned that the proposed buffer of thuya tree plantings won't be adequate to block the view of tents on platforms by the time the campground opens for business. One of the platforms, Site 13, is located directly behind our house. It'll take at least a few years for the proposed plantings to grow sufficiently to include the view of that tent on the platform. And during that time, the activities will be clearly visible to us and to others staying there. And, you know, I'm on my back porch grilling every night in the summer, so I expect I would be able to see what's going on. The noise from the site will be clearly audible to us through the open windows in our house. It's only about 125 feet away. I'm concerned that campers staying in the platform tent, as well as a cabin directly behind our house in Site 14, will not be inclined to walk to the facilities when nature calls, especially at night. Be much more convenient for them to use the woods right behind their house, and anyone who's been camping knows that's true, especially for men. I've lived on the island for almost 17 years. Most of that time was in Bar Harbor, and one of the things that drew us to this side of the island and bought a house in 2019 was the quiet. It's a lot quieter. Noises stand out, they carry. It's particularly noticeable in the summer with the influx of tourists. We live across the street from Captain Woods and First Mate, and last summer was crazy with the tourists coming there, and we had to go out on several occasions to tell them to keep it down after midnight. One occasion they had, around their campfire, they had a drum circle going, firing up at midnight. And fortunately, people did keep it down, but there's no reason to believe that guests at Pointy Head would be any better behaved. When we go on vacation, we like to party. You know, that's just what people do. So I had every reason to expect something. In 2019, when they had the tent down on the Pointy Head, you could hear the parties going down from our house a half a mile away. So a campground with 30 guests and 15 sites is going to increase the noise level. And I don't think the buffer is going to take care of that. Light's another concern. We love the night sky on this side of the island. It's spectacular on a clear night. And so campground lighting's gonna have a negative impact on that, with lamps and lanterns and tents, headlights on carts that will be used by campers to get to and fro, flashlights in the woods, any security lighting, I don't know. And finally, fire and smoke. There's not gonna, they say they're not gonna have campfires at the sites. There's just a central campfire, smoke carries. The thing is, if I was staying in the woods in a cabin or a tent, I'd be tempted to build a small fire at my site using a portable fire pit. We all have those. They're easy to buy now. You can bring them with you camping, so I don't, and so it gets cold at night here, especially in the shoulder seasons, April, May, and September and October. So, how are guests in the tents and cabins going to keep warm? Are they going to be equipped with cook stoves, kerosene heaters, fire extinguishers? Even if they're not provided and they're prohibited on paper, what assurance do we have the guests will not bring them and use them? And what recourse do we have if the rules aren't followed? So we have a lot of concerns about this, and what evidence we have suggests the applicant doesn't really have much regard for those concerns or the impact it's going to have on the neighbors. Don't know her. So if the development's permitted, I'm worried that we're not gonna have much recourse to deal with annoying guests, other problems, particularly when they arise in the off hours when the campground staff are not present. We urge you to deny the application. Thank you.
Thanks. Sir, I'm sorry, I don't know your name,
No, it's
please.
okay. I'm Robert Welsh. My wife, Deneen, and I we'll be moving to a property south of the, abutting the south, where we border Ken Gott and Jim. So we bought Doreen Richmond's house at 32 Bass Harbor Woods. The plan still has her name on there, but we purchased it last September 30th. So we have just similar concerns, particularly because we have such a long border to the north that the buffering is not going to be adequate. Currently, one of the reasons we bought this house is because it's on the quiet side of the island, a place we've come to many times, and we wanted that balance to, if we want to go to Acadia or Bar Harbor, we can, but the appeal of this spot is that it's quieter and that the character of the neighborhood is more peaceful, darker. From our house, we have a great western sunset and a great view over towards the harbor. And we also have a great view of a tent platform and a cabin that we can see from every window on the west side of our house and from our deck. And I can't imagine how long it would take for buffering to grow to hide a tent on top of the platform. So we're really worried about the proposed Uyas and that are on the plan, that's going to be enough to buffer all of the sites along that side in 4 years or longer. We're also really concerned with, towards the back of our property, we have a garden, and there's a hedge of, some evergreen, but a lot of deciduous plants. Right now, the proposal is to put a 1 row of Uyas there, which doesn't seem to meet the required 15 feet depth of a buffer. Even at maturity, they may not reach that, I don't know. But it's gonna take a long time. So that's a great concern. I just wonder how long it's going to take for any proposed buffer, certainly the one that is proposed, to actually be a buffer, as opposed to be, just sort of window dressing or site dressing. We're worried about the change this will have on the character of the neighborhood. As we bought it, we looked at a lot of places when we were searching for a house, and we bought this house because of the character of the place, because of the dark skies, because of the relative quietude, and because of the character of the neighborhood as it exists now. We're worried that will change, and of course the applicant has never reached out to us the time that we've owned the property, never to seek our concerns or even understanding. Another big concern for us is that on the backside of our property is where our well is, and the proposed plan is siting the septic system 103 feet from our well, and theoretically, 100 feet is the minimum requirement based on the projected usage, but that doesn't leave a lot of margin for error if, once it's constructed, how are we assured that it's the appropriate distance? How can we even be assured that, you know, given the complexities of the water table, that it won't at some point contaminate our well? It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of certainty around that, and that's very concerning because it's our well. And then I think, you know, finally, also echoing what Jim said, just the necessary, if the site is going to have the necessary amount of lighting to make it safe, it's going to create a surprising amount of light pollution. Right now, it's not clear just to the extent the lighting, the extent of the lighting plans, or how that lighting is going to be powered. I guess it's theoretically solar, but I don't know what that looks like as far as, is there an array, is every little light going to have a solar panel on it? And just, if there's adequate lighting for paths and on top of tent platforms, that's going to produce a lot of light pollution right next door to us, right where we sit at night looking at it. And the noise would also be a big issue for us. So those are the big things for us. We don't feel like the plan as it is adequately addresses the buffering of the lighting, you know, potential noise problems, and especially just the concern of the safety of our well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Somebody in the back there, is that you, Laura?
It's me. Apologize if I'm getting over a cough, but there's going to be a bit of echoing, but I think it's important that the board hear that we all have very similar concerns. So if you're hearing the same thing over and over, I'm not going to apologize for that. My name is Laura Lowe, and I live with Jim Kaufman at 36 Fast Harbor Woods Road.
Hold on a second.
Directly
Mr. Barrow,
I only know her as Laura, I didn't hear her last.
Laura
Okay.
Levin. Okay.
and she is, I hate to use the word partner,
Partner, yes.
okay, with Jim Kaufman, okay, so.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, our property directly abuts two of the proposed sites, number 13 and 14. We also have a pretty clear view at this time of that septic and leach field. And we strongly request that you and the public seriously consider the negative impact this development, if approved, will have on the quality of life that initially drew us to Bar Harbor. Our privacy, the quiet, Bass Harbor, God, I'm sorry. Our privacy, the quiet, get me out of Bar Harbor, and tranquility we so enjoy in our own homes are at risk, not to mention our property values. Although the zoning is residential business, this is a neighborhood, not a business district. The businesses that do operate along our road are not nearly as impactful as what the Quania campground is proposing, with one exception, but that's, Jim addressed that too. We are year-round residents. We moved here in May of 2019. We were attracted to the relative quiet of the quiet side, and we're hoping to escape the seasonal hustle bustle of Bar Harbor where we used to live. We are sympathetic to the applicant, our neighbor whom we have never met, and her desire and right to enjoy the best use of her property. We understand the difficulty she faces due to the zoning designation that just restrict the use of her driveway as a road and consequently access to the rest of the property. However, our neighbor has so far demonstrated that she is not at all sympathetic to our same desire and right. We were quite taken aback and disturbed when this development was first proposed in 2020. While our original submittal was inadequate and thus denied, it reflected an arrogance and disregard of us, this neighborhood, and of you, the planning board. The new submittal, while much more professional, still does not adequately address our concerns. As I previously stated, two proposed sites are directly behind our home. Site 13 is within sight and smell of our bedroom, living room, back deck, and yard. And here are photos that we submitted through for attorney. This is most problematic site for us, as it is proposed as a raised platform with a tent on top, situated just at the required 50 feet from our property line. Site 14 is proposed as a cabin. That has since been moved, but it's still going to be behind our property line, I think now, instead of 50, 75 feet. Situated just at, okay, but it wasn't reflected in the plans when we first saw them. We are having a difficult time envisioning just how these sites can be adequately buffered so as to protect us in a timely manner from the noise those sites are bound to generate, as well as the visual impact and the light. There's also noise, dust, and visual impact of the machinery that will be used during construction. Noise and smoke from the campground are of great concern, as we already know from our experience these last 3 seasons with Captain Woods and First Mate across our street, and Jim's already talked about that. And just to add too, that construction is likely going to be done during the time of year when they can do it, and that's gonna be just when we wanna be enjoying the outdoors as well, okay? Or at least that's what I would expect. What's really at issue here for us is trust. The applicant has not given us any reason to trust her motives or intentions to operate within the law, nor to consider the effects her proposal will have on her neighbors. While being neighborly is not written directly into the zoning ordinance, the planning board is required to consider how a development will affect surrounding properties, and that's why we are all here. So you've heard, or will hear about some of the illegal activities of which you are already aware that have already occurred on her property. The applicant has repeatedly demonstrated a disregard for the law of the neighbors and seems to prefer bullying or asking forgiveness rather than permission, with an expectation that it will be granted. We have no reason to trust that the rules of the campground, rules that have so far only been mentioned verbally, will be enforced. We've been given many reassurances, again only verbal, that among other things, there will be only 2 people per unit, no children, and that the units will have no fires, no cooking, no plumbing, etc. These rules hardly seem realistic to how, and so far nothing in writing. And here, I don't know how many of you have ever been camping. I have. There's no question in my mind that this is a campground. But those of you that may have find some of the applicants verbally expressed expectations a bit hard to accept. We've been asked to expect that the pointing head is really supposed to be more like hotel rooms than campsites. While it is not our business to question or criticize the viability of the applicant's business plan, it does seem reasonable for the planning board to ask for one and for us as neighbors to see it. I, for one, have never stayed in a hotel room without a bathroom, fire door, or blackout curtains. We are supposed to accept that all the campers will obey all rules all the time and not light fires, not smoke cigarettes and whatever, not throw noisy parties, have loud conversations late into the night, use the woods as a latrine behind or even on our property instead of the service buildings, use kerosene and other flammable things, candles, propane stoves, other fire hazards. Activities that any of us who've ever been camping and just add alcohol know are part of the camping experience. We are not at all convinced that the proposed buffering, which has also been addressed, will adequately mitigate the sounds that carry in our otherwise quiet neighborhood all sources of lighting or smoke. We have little faith in the ability of the town to enforce any violations, nor in the applicant's ability to desire to enforce her own rules, and so far these rules are only talk. In 2019, again, our neighbor and co-plaintiff Leslie Jones witnessed campers on the Pointing Head Shoreline Protected Zone relieving themselves off the point rather than crossing over to use available facilities. From our house, which is up the street, we could hear the noise from the late night partying from our home. So you can imagine what Leslie must have experienced. These campers were allowed by the applicant to camp there using structures that were built there for that purpose, also illegally. How are we to be assured that our own woods that abuts the campsite will not be violated in the same manner in the future? And I just wanted to add too that we are very concerned about the environmental impacts of the wetlands and the vernal pools and the water supplies, but other people, Dan's already addressed that. So again, we strongly urge you to deny this application.
Thank you. Ma'am?
So I have 2 small pieces. My name's Deneen Welsh, married to Bobby. We bought the house 32,000.
Your name again, I'm sorry?
Deneen Welsh.
Deneen, okay.
Yeah, like Janine, but with a D.
Okay.
So I have 2 points I just want to make briefly following Bobby's comments, and then I have a letter from Leslie Jones that she has asked us to read.
Is that the one we already have in our packets? About the
like
straws?
The straws, it's the straw letter.
Yeah,
So
we have all that,
okay.
yes.
All right, never mind. Okay, so I just want to make 2 brief comments. The provisions of the site plan review ordinance, quote, are intended to protect the public health and safety, promote the general welfare of the community, and conserve the environment. We really believe this proposed campground fails to meet this standard in many ways. The last thing I want to mention, in the state of Maine subsurface wastewater disposal rules, Section 4 covers design criteria for disposal fields, states, the owner must accurately describe the intended uses, present and future, for the system. On page 3A of HHE 200 in the original application, there is a drawing of a line with a note that says, "This line may connect to future expansion field." There is nothing in the plan that explains what that future expansion might be. And that septic field is 103.6 feet away from our well. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, nothing from the middle or the, this side, huh? Okay. Anybody on the board here want to say anything before I close the public hearing or ask a question or anything? Okay.
Mark,
Yes?
the biggest concern I have is access to the property.
Please identify yourself,
I'm
even
sorry.
though I know who you are.
Sorry, I'm Captain Michael Little, 11 Shore Road,
Okay.
nowhere nearby. The access to the property crosses a commercial fisheries zone, which isn't allowed to have access to for a non-commercial fishing marine use zone. I think that's a real issue with accessing. And I don't see any means for making that legal. It's the biggest concern I've got.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Bear, are you all set?
Well, Mr. Chairman, what I would like to do is to be able to take most of this information under advisement, because as we had mentioned, or Mr. Moyse had mentioned in his brief report to you, there is a vernal pool that he can only examine at a certain time of the year, which is May, which may impact this project significantly. If it turns out that it's a significant vernal pool, we would have to relocate a number of our proposed sites. So we have heard the comments that have been made tonight. We don't agree that our application doesn't address many of those, but I think that we can take these comments and we will provide you with a complete and robust response, along with Mr. Moyse's conclusions about the vernal pool, which could significantly impact the project, which we won't know until the middle of May. So I don't want to spend time and resources until I have that information.
So our next meeting is supposed to be scheduled May 17th. Are you saying you don't want us to address the application until after you complete the vernal pool study?
I am saying that, and I don't know when that would be. Can I ask Mr. Moyse to address?
Yeah, sure.
And we're hopeful we'll be able to look at that next week. It's fairly heavy cover there, so it tends to be a little bit later than the ID season and one that's more in the open. So we're hoping to be able to look at that next week and have the water temperature be where it should be. So we can do our first visit and then we do a subsequent one within a couple of weeks. So the answer is we should be able to be all set by the 17th.
Okay.
By the 17th, if we don't get something to this board before a week before that, so the 17th is really the 10th.
Yeah.
And we technically can't, because we have to make 2 visits.
We can.
Will be June 7th.
We can't.
What's that?
June
We have to
7th.
have that in before that.
Yeah, what's our next meeting, June
June
7th?
7th.
That's when the critters are out.
Actually, when's town meeting?
We only have one meeting in May.
What?
May 10th.
Selectmen?
May 10th.
9th, 10th, okay, so not the 7th. Okay. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, it'd have to be the 7th. Is it, you only have one meeting,
Yep. June 7th.
it'd be June 2nd,
Yeah.
7th.
June 7th.
I say May is different because of time.
We only have one, yeah.
Well, we still want to have a meeting on the 17th for
Yes.
anything else.
Yep.
We don't have anything at this point. You want to schedule it anyway? And then we can always cancel, or don't you see a reason?
decision next week.
You'll make that decision next week, then we need to schedule it at this point, right? Okay, hold on. First of all, any more public comments? Otherwise, I'm gonna close the public hearing. Close the public hearing at 7:28. Sound good, Jamie? It feels like 9:28 or something, but yeah. Okay, and no new business, no CEO issues, no other. So let's take a motion to set the date for the next meeting, May 17th, 6 o'clock here.
I'll make a motion to set the next meeting for May 17th at 6 o'clock here in the Harvard Kelly meeting room.
Second.
Motion is second on the table to set the next meeting, 6 o'clock, right here, Harvey Kelly Meeting Room, May 17th. All in favor? 4-0, okay. And I'll take a motion to adjourn at 7:29.
One quick question. In the event that the applicant in Pointy Head does I can't speak English, substantial modifications to the plan, you've closed the public hearing, do we have the opportunity to comment on substantial changes to the plan if they occur?
I think you would, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did the same thing with AWL when they made substantial changes.
Thank you, just one check.
Is there anything limiting us from having another public hearing?
I don't see what's to gain by it other than, unless there are some changes,
Well, that's
some
what I was-
major changes, yeah.
Well, I guess at a certain point, we might have to start over. I guess there's always the question, like, is it a new application with a totally different proposal? If they come back and they're like, oh, campground, we're not gonna do a campground, we're gonna do a putt-putt golf course instead. All right, anyway, sorry. Just thinking. You don't have to respond. Don't respond to that.
I had a good joke, but I'm not gonna touch it, okay? Okay, take a motion to adjourn now. It's 7:30, that you delayed it. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
At 7:30.
At 7:30.
Motion and second on the table to adjourn. All in favor? 4-0, thank you. Thanks, folks.
Totally. Well, I don't know. Let's find out about the wetlands first.
Yeah, I know, I've already thought of that.
This goal? In like mosquito infested, I don't know, custom mosquito. What do you think you could do? Winter.
Thank you. Make sure I get a bill. You too. I had nothing to do.